He survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, dismantled IEDs in the dead of night, and carried his wounded brothers through fire. But when Sergeant Major Daniel Thorne tried to board Flight 492 to go home to his dying sister, the war followed him to the airport. A power-tripping airline rep didn't just reject his ID, she humiliated him in front of hundreds. She thought she was the ultimate authority at Gate B12. She was wrong, because standing 3 feet behind him was the one man she never should have crossed. You won't believe the karma that hit this terminal. The air conditioning inside Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3 was fighting a losing battle against the July heat wave. But the temperature wasn't the reason Daniel Thorne was sweating. It was the clock. It was 14 good hours. Flight 492 to Washington, D.C. was scheduled to board in 45 minutes. If he missed this flight, he missed the last visiting hours at Walter Reed Medical Center. His younger sister, Chloe, wasn't doing well. The text message from his brother-in-law, David, burned a hole in his pocket. "She's asking for you, Mark. Hurry." Daniel shifted his weight, trying to ease the pressure on his left leg. The titanium rod in his shin, a souvenir from a roadside bomb in Kandahar back in 2012, always ached when rain was coming, or when stress was high. Today, it was throbbing. He looked unassuming. At 45, Daniel didn't wear his service on his sleeve anymore. He wore a faded grey hoodie, comfortable cargo pants, and a Chicago Cubs baseball cap pulled low. He carried a single, beaten-up duffel bag that had seen more continents than most people see states. To the untrained eye, he looked like a drifter, maybe a manual laborer heading to a gig. He certainly didn't look like a retired sergeant major of the United States Army Special Forces with a silver star and 2 Purple Hearts. The line for the check-in counter for Sky High Airlines was a serpentine beast of frustrated humanity. The automated kiosks were down, a system-wide glitch, the announcement had said, forcing everyone to see a human agent. And the human agent manning the first-class priority lane was Patricia Gable. Patricia was a fixture at O'Hare, and not in a good way. She was in her late 50s, with hair dyed a severe shade of blonde that clashed with the fluorescent lights. Her badge hung from a lanyard, bedazzled with rhinestones. She didn't just work the counter, she ruled it. She typed with aggressive, long fingernails that sounded like gunfire against the plastic keyboard. Clack, clack, clack. Daniel watched her interact with the passenger in front of him, a young mother with a crying toddler. "I told you, Mum." Patricia's voice was nasally and carried a tone of practiced condescension. "The stroller exceeds the dimensions for a carry-on. You have to check it. That will be $75. "But the website said—" the mother stammered. "The website isn't standing here. I am," Patricia snapped, peering over her rimless glasses. "Pay the fee or step aside. You're holding up my line." The mother, tears welling up, handed over a credit card. Patricia snatched it, ran it, and threw the receipt on the counter without a thank you. Daniel took a deep breath. He hated confrontation. He had spent 20 years in a world where confrontation meant life or death, so he had zero patience for it in the civilian world. He just wanted to get his boarding pass, get on the plane, and see Chloe. He stepped up to the podium. "Next!" Patricia yelled, even though he was already standing there. She didn't look up. She was aggressively organizing a stack of baggage tags, snapping the rubber bands with unnecessary force. "Good afternoon," Daniel said, his voice deep and gravelly. "I'm checking in for Flight 4922 to D.C. System wouldn't let me check in on my phone." Patricia finally looked up. Her eyes did a quick scan, head to toe. She saw the hoodie, the faded cap, the scuffed boots, and finally, the black face of a man who didn't fit her profile of a priority passenger. "This is the priority lane, sir," Patricia said, her voice dropping to a chilly volume. Economy is lines 4 through 8. Back there. She pointed a manicured finger toward a chaotic mass of people near the entrance. I know, Daniel said calmly. I'm priority. First-class ticket. He didn't mention that the ticket was a gift from his old unit, pooled together so he could travel comfortably with his leg injury. Patricia let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a happy sound, it was a scoff. Can I see your ticket and ID? Daniel pulled out his phone to show the confirmation code and reached into his wallet. He didn't pull out a driver's license. He had lost it 2 days ago in the chaos of moving apartments. Instead, he pulled out his easiest form of federal identification, his United States Uniformed Services Privilege and Identification Card. Specifically, the blue-coded card for retired military personnel. He placed the ID and his phone on the counter. Patricia glanced at the phone screen. Ticket looks valid, she muttered, sounding disappointed. Then she picked up the military ID. She held it by the very corner, as if it were contaminated. She squinted at it, flipped it over, and then looked back at Daniel. I need a real ID, sir. Daniel blinked. Excuse me? A driver's license, a passport, a state ID. Patricia listed off, dropping the military card back onto the counter with a clatter. I can't accept this. That is a federal ID, ma'am, Daniel said, keeping his voice level. It's a Department of Defense identification card. It's valid for air travel. I use it all the time. Patricia sighed, the long, dramatic sigh of a martyr dealing with a simpleton. Sir, look at the picture. It's black and white. The lamination is peeling on the corner. It looks like something you bought at a novelty shop. TSA might let you through with their little scanners, but Sky High Airlines has strict identity policies. It's not a novelty card, Daniel said, his grip tightening on the strap of his bag. I served 20 years. That's a retired military ID. So you say, Patricia muttered. She typed something furiously on her keyboard. Look, I don't have time for this. We are oversold. If you don't have a driver's license, I can't board you. I lost my license, Daniel admitted. That's why I'm using this. It is a legal form of ID. You can check the TSA guidelines right there on your screen. Patricia leaned forward, her face hardening. I don't need to check anything. I know my job. And my job is to ensure the safety of this flight. I don't know who you are, but I'm not letting someone on my plane with a homemade ID card. Now step aside. The line behind them was growing. People were watching. I'm not stepping aside, Daniel said. The soldier in him was waking up, not the violent part, but the rigid, unmovable object part. I have a valid ticket. I have a valid federal ID. I need to get to DC. My sister is in the hospital. He shouldn't have said it. He knew it the moment the words left his lips. Giving a bully personal information never garnered sympathy. It only gave them ammunition. Patricia's eyes lit up. She smelled blood. Oh, the sick relative story. I hear that 3 times a day. Look, sir, I don't care if the president is waiting for you. Without proper ID, you are a security risk. A security risk, Daniel repeated, incredulous. I held top-secret clearance for 15 years. So you claim, Patricia shot back. She picked up the phone on her desk. I'm going to ask you one last time to leave the priority line before I call security. You are disturbing the other passengers. I am a passenger. Daniel's voice rose, just a fraction. He's right. A voice came from behind him. Daniel turned. A middle-aged man in a business suit was standing there, checking his watch. I've seen those IDs before. My brother has one. They're legit. Just let the man on the plane. Patricia's head snapped toward the businessman. Sir, unless you work for the FAA or Sky High Security, I suggest you mind your business. I am the lead agent here. She turned her glare back to Daniel. "You are being aggressive." "I haven't moved," Daniel said. "I haven't threatened you. I am standing here asking you to do your job." Patricia slammed the phone down. "That's it." She stood up, smoothing her uniform skirt, and walked out from behind the podium. She positioned herself between Daniel and the jet bridge door, crossing her arms. "I am denying you boarding," she announced, loud enough for the entire terminal section to hear. "Reason: belligerent behavior and refusal to provide valid identification." She reached over to the computer terminal. "I'm cancelling your ticket. You can take it up with customer service. On the phone, outside the security checkpoint." Daniel felt a cold chill run down his spine. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. If she cancelled the ticket, he'd lose his seat. The flight was full. The next flight wasn't until tomorrow morning. Chloe might not be awake by then. "Do not cancel that ticket," Daniel warned, his voice low. "You are making a mistake." "The only mistake," Patricia sneered, "was thinking you could intimidate me." She hit the enter key with a flourish. "Done. Seat 3A is now open. Next passenger." The air in the terminal seemed to vanish. The injustice was so thick you could taste it. Daniel stood there, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the immense effort it took to restrain himself. "You have no idea what you just did," Daniel whispered. "I just kept my passengers safe from a vagrant," Patricia said. She looked past him to the line. "Next, come on up. Seat 3A just became available for an upgrade." Behind Daniel, the line shuffled awkwardly. No one moved forward immediately. The businessman who had spoken up looked at Daniel with pity, but kept his mouth shut this time. But further back in the line, about 10 people deep, the crowd parted. A tall figure was moving through the sea of travelers. He moved with a distinct gait, upright, purposeful, commanding space without asking for it. He was wearing a sharp, charcoal grey suit, but he carried a leather briefcase that looked military issue. He had been watching the interaction for the last 3 minutes. He had seen the ID. He had heard the tone, and he recognized the back of Daniel Thorne's head. Daniel didn't see the man approaching. He was too focused on Patricia, who was now actively ignoring him and waving a young couple forward. "Security is on the way to escort you out," Patricia threw over her shoulder at Daniel. "If you don't move, you will be arrested for trespassing." "I'm not leaving until I get a manager," Daniel said, planting his feet. "I am the manager on duty," Patricia lied. She wasn't. The actual station manager, a man named Henderson, was currently on his lunch break. Patricia was just the senior lead, but she wielded that title like a hammer. 2 airport police officers were making their way through the crowd on segways. The blue lights were flashing silently. "There he is!" Patricia pointed an accusatory finger at Daniel as the officers dismounted. "He's refusing to leave the secure area. He's aggressive. He threatened me." The officers, both young, looked at Daniel. They saw a large black man in a hoodie standing his ground. Their hands instinctively drifted toward their belts. "Sir," the first officer said, stepping into Daniel's personal space, "you need to step back and come with us." "I have a ticket," Daniel said, holding up his phone, though the screen now showed a cancelled notification. "She wrongfully terminated my booking because she doesn't recognize a military ID." "We can sort that out at the station," the officer said, reaching for Daniel's arm. "Don't touch me," Daniel said. It wasn't a threat, it was a boundary. "I have injuries. Just let me walk." "Sir, put your hands behind your back," the officer escalated, pulling out cuffs. Patricia was beaming. She crossed her arms, a smug smile plastered on her face. This was her favorite part, the part where she won, the part where the problem was removed, and she could go back to her coffee. "He's probably drunk," Patricia added helpfully to the police. "Or on drugs." Look at his eyes." Daniel's eyes were red from lack of sleep and crying over his sister's diagnosis earlier that morning. The officer grabbed Daniel's wrist. Daniel winced as the talk twisted his shoulder. "Officer, stand down." The voice cracked through the terminal like a whip. It was a baritone roar, projected from the diaphragm, the kind of voice that stops recruits in their tracks from 300 yards away. The police officer froze. Patricia jumped. The entire gate area went silent. The man in the charcoal suit stepped into the open circle. He was older than Daniel, perhaps in his early 60s, with silver hair cut in a high and tight that defied civilian fashion. He stood 6'4". He walked straight past the police officers, ignoring them completely, and stopped directly in front of Patricia's podium. He slammed a heavy hand down on the counter. "I said," the man repeated, his voice dangerously calm now, "stand down." The officer released Daniel's wrist, confused. "Sir, step back. This is a police matter." The silver-haired man turned slowly to face the police. He didn't look intimidated. He looked disappointed. "This isn't a police matter, son," the man said. "This is a federal incident in the making, and you are on the wrong side of it." Patricia bristled. She didn't like being upstaged. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are? You can't just interrupt an arrest. This man is a security threat." The man turned his gaze to Patricia. His eyes were like steel. "A security threat?" the man asked. He gestured to Daniel, who was rubbing his wrist. "That man? Yes, he has a fake ID and he's been harassing me," Patricia shrieked. The man let out a dry chuckle. He reached into his inner suit pocket. The police tensed, but he simply pulled out a wallet. He flipped it open. A gold badge gleamed in the overhead lights. But it wasn't a police badge. It was a Department of Defense ID, framed by a rank insignia that made the police officer's eyes widen. 4 stars. "I am General Arthur Sterling," he said, his voice ringing out, "Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army, and I suggest you take your hands off my Sergeant Major before I have this entire terminal locked down." Patricia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Daniel looked up, shock washing over his face. "General?" General Sterling turned to Daniel. The hard lines of his face softened instantly. He ignored the police, ignored Patricia, and stepped forward. He didn't shake Daniel's hand. He pulled the exhausted veteran into a firm, brotherly embrace. "Good to see you, Hollow Point," Sterling whispered, using Daniel's old call sign. "I got your 6. Sterling pulled back and looked at the police officers. "You can put the cuffs away, unless you plan on arresting the man who saved my life in the Korengal Valley." The officers holstered their cuffs immediately, looking terrified. "Sorry, General. We were told he was a threat." "The only threat here," Sterling said, turning back to the counter, "is the incompetence behind this podium." Patricia was trembling. Her face had gone from smug flush to a ghostly pale. She looked at the computer screen where she had just deleted the ticket. She looked at the angry crowd that was now filming everything on their phones. I was just following protocol," Patricia stammered, her voice squeaking. "His ID. It looked fake." Sterling walked up to the counter. He picked up Daniel's discarded military ID. He held it up to Patricia's face. "This is a standard issue DD Form 2, Reserve Retired," Sterling said, enunciating every syllable. "If you cannot identify this, you have no business working at an international airport. You just denied boarding to a Distinguished Service Cross recipient." I didn't know," Patricia whispered. "You didn't ask," Sterling corrected her. "You judged." Sterling leaned in close. "You said seat 3A was open." I cancelled it. It's gone from the system." "Put it back," Sterling commanded. "I can't. Once it's deleted, I can't reinstate it without a manager's override code." Patricia was panicking now. "Then get a manager," Sterling said. "Now, before I make a phone call to the Pentagon and have them review your airline's government contract. And believe me, Patricia," he read her name tag with disdain, "we spend a lot of money with Sky High. That contract is up for renewal next month." Patricia scrambled for the phone, her hands shaking so hard she dropped the receiver twice. But the drama wasn't over. The crowd, sensing the shift in power, started to cheer. Someone shouted, "Fire her!" Daniel stepped up beside the general. "Sir, I just need to get to Chloe. It's bad." Sterling's expression darkened with concern. "I know, son. David texted me too. That's why I'm on this flight. I was coming to see you both." "You were?" Daniel asked. "Never leave a man behind," Sterling said, "especially not family." Patricia was frantically whispering into the phone. "Mr. Henderson." "Yes, it's an emergency." "No, I need you here now. There's a general." She hung up and looked at them with wide, fearful eyes. "He's coming." "Good," Sterling said. He looked at the long line of economy passengers. He looked at the first-class lane. Then he looked at the police officers who were still hovering awkwardly. "Officers," Sterling said, "since you're here, why don't you take a statement? I'd like to file a formal complaint of harassment and discrimination against this airline representative." "Yes, sir," the officer said, pulling out his notepad, happy to be on the winning side now. "Name?" the officer asked Patricia. "Patricia Gable," she whispered, tears finally starting to form. Not tears of remorse, but tears of someone realizing consequences were actually a real thing. "And write this down," Sterling added. "She destroyed a valid boarding pass of a traveling veteran. That's interference with federal transit." The crowd was loving it. Phones were held high, live streaming the downfall of the airport tyrant. But the biggest twist was yet to come. As Mr. Henderson, the station manager, came running down the concourse, red-faced and out of breath, he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a woman in a sharp navy suit, the regional director of Sky High Airlines, who just happened to be doing a surprise inspection that day. And she had seen the whole thing from the back of the line. The silence that had fallen over Gate B12 was heavy, the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. The only sound was the low hum of the terminal's ventilation system and the frantic, shallow breathing of Patricia Gable. Mr. Henderson, the station manager for Sky High Airlines at O'Hare, arrived in a flurry of cheap polyester and nervous energy. He was a balding man in his late 40s who hated conflict and usually spent his shifts hiding in the back office playing solitaire. When Patricia had called him, screaming about a security breach and a riot, he had expected a drunken bachelor party or a fistfight. He did not expect to see a 4-star general staring at his employee like a wolf staring at a trapped rabbit. "Patricia!" Henderson gasped, adjusting his crooked tie. He instinctively moved behind the podium, placing himself on her side of the line, a visual protecting of the shield. "What on earth is happening? Why are the police here?" He didn't look at Daniel. He didn't look at the general. He looked at his employee, assuming the role of the beleaguered manager defending his turf. "They won't leave," Patricia hissed, her voice trembling. She pointed a shaking finger at Daniel. "That man refused to show valid ID. I followed protocol. I denied him boarding. And then he," she gestured wildly at General Sterling, "interfered with airport operations and threatened me." Henderson finally turned to the two men. He saw Daniel, still clutching his wrist where the officer had grabbed him, looking exhausted and broken. Then he saw General Sterling, whose posture was so rigid he looked like he was carved from granite. "Gentlemen," Henderson said, puffing out his chest in a weak attempt at authority. "I am the station manager. If Ms. Gable denied you boarding, she had a reason. Federal regulations are strict. If you continue to cause a scene, I will have to ask the officers to remove you from the terminal entirely." General Sterling didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply tilted his head, studying Henderson as if he were a particularly disappointing recruit. "Mr. Henderson, is it?" Sterling asked. The voice was low, vibrating through the floorboards. "Yes. And I don't care what rank you are," Henderson snapped, emboldened by his own ignorance. "This is a private airline. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. Even a man with a silver star holding a valid Department of Defense ID?" Sterling asked. "Even when your agent lied about a ticket cancellation? Even when she publicly humiliated a disabled veteran?" Henderson scoffed. "Patricia is our senior lead. She knows the ID book back to front. If she says the ID is invalid, it's invalid." It was a fatal error. Henderson had bet on the wrong horse without checking the odds. "Is that so?" The voice came from behind the crowd. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension like a razor blade. It was a woman's voice, cool, refined, and terrifyingly calm. The crowd of onlookers who had been holding their breath parted like the Red Sea. Walking through the gap was the woman in the navy suit. She had been standing in the economy line for 20 minutes, unnoticed. She held a tablet in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, professional bun, and her heels clicked against the linoleum with a rhythm that sounded like a ticking clock. She stopped 3 feet from the podium. She looked at Henderson. Then she looked at Patricia. Henderson's face went from flushed to an ashen grey in less than a second. He recognized her. Everyone in management recognized her. She was the face on the quarterly training videos. She was the signature at the bottom of the paychecks. "Ms. Vance?" Henderson stammered, his knees actually buckling slightly. I didn't know you were in Chicago." Evelyn Vance, the regional director of operations for Sky High Airlines, a woman known in the industry as the Butcher for how ruthlessly she cut incompetence, didn't smile. "I know you didn't, Robert," she said softly. Surprise inspections work best that way. She stepped up to the counter, placing her coffee cup down on top of Patricia's neatly organized stack of luggage tags. Patricia stared at the cup as if it were a bomb. "I've been standing in line for 20 minutes, Vance said, turning to face the crowd, then pivoting back to her employees. "I wanted to see how my team handles a stressful Sunday shift." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And do you know what I saw?" Vance asked. "Ms. Vance, I can explain." Patricia started, her voice high and desperate. "Silence," Vance said. She didn't shout it. She simply dropped the word like a heavy stone. Patricia's mouth snapped shut. Vance turned to Daniel. Her demeanor shifted instantly from cold executive to human being. She looked at his hoodie, his weary eyes, the way he favored his left leg. She looked at the military ID still sitting on the counter where General Sterling had left it. "Sir," Vance said to Daniel, "my name is Evelyn Vance. I run this region. On behalf of Sky High Airlines, I want to offer a preliminary apology. But words are cheap." She turned back to Henderson. "Robert, pull up the flight manifest for 492. "Yes, ma'am?" Henderson fumbled with the keyboard, his hands shaking so badly he hit the wrong keys twice. I can't," Henderson whispered. "The system says seat 3A is empty, but the ticket status is user cancelled." Vance leaned over the counter, invading Patricia's personal space. "User cancelled? Or agent cancelled?" Patricia stared at her shoes. "Open the audit log, Robert," Vance commanded. "Every keystroke is recorded. Who cancelled Sergeant Major Thorne's ticket, and at what time?" Henderson typed. He swallowed hard. "Agent ID, PG4 and 4 to 9. Patricia Gable. Timestamp 14:08. 3 minutes ago, Vance noted. Right when I heard Miss Gable tell this gentleman that she was the manager and that he was a security risk. Vance picked up the military ID. She held it up to the light. Robert, she asked, not looking away from the card, what is the Sky High policy regarding U.S. Uniformed Services IDs? They are to be accepted as primary identification for domestic travel, Henderson recited, his voice barely a whisper. Correct, Vance said. She dropped the card onto the counter. It made a sharp snap. So, Patricia didn't just break policy. She lied to a customer. She impersonated a manager. She wasted police resources. Vance turned to the police officers. Officers, you can stand down. Sky High will not be pressing charges against Mr. Thorne. However, we might need you to take a statement regarding a disturbance of the peace caused by my staff. The officers looked at each other, shrugged, and stepped back. They were enjoying this now. Now, Vance said, looking at General Sterling. General, I believe you mentioned a dying relative? His sister, Sterling said, his voice hard. She's at Walter Reed. He needs to be on this plane. Vance looked at the screen. Robert, reinstate the ticket. I can't, Henderson said, sweating profusely. When Patricia cancelled it, the system automatically released the seat to the standby list. It's already been grabbed by a Platinum member who just checked in online. The air left the room. Daniel closed his eyes and lowered his head. It's gone, he whispered. I'm not going to make it. Patricia let out a tiny, almost audible breath of relief. She thought that if the seat was gone, the problem would just go away. She could get written up, maybe suspended, but the man would leave. She was wrong. Evelyn Vance stared at the screen. She saw the despair on Daniel's face. She saw the rage simmering in General Sterling's eyes, and she saw the smugness creeping back into the corners of Patricia's mouth. That smugness sealed Patricia's fate. The seat is taken? Vance repeated slowly. Yes, Ms. Vance, Henderson said, sounding apologetic but helpless. The system is automated. Once the seat is released, it's gone. We have a full flight, overbooked by 3. I see, Vance said. She tapped her fingernail against the counter. Tap, tap, tap. She turned to Daniel. Mr. Thorne, you served in the Special Forces. Daniel looked up, confused by the question. Yes, ma'am. 5th Special Forces Group. You handle pressure well? I'd like to think so. Good, Vance said. Then she turned to Patricia. Patricia, step out from behind the podium. Excuse me? Patricia blinked. Step out, Vance said. Now. Patricia unlatched the small gate and stepped into the concourse, standing exposed before the crowd, the general, and her boss. She smoothed her skirt, trying to maintain her dignity. Patricia, how long have you worked for Sky High? Vance asked, her voice deceptively conversational. 12 years, Patricia said, lifting her chin. I have a perfect attendance record. And in those 12 years, have you ever read the core values of this company? Of course. One of them is respect, Vance said. Do you feel you showed respect today? He was dressed like a thug, Patricia blurted out, unable to help herself. He had a hoodie. He was aggressive. The ID looked fake. I was protecting the flight. The crowd gasped. The racial coding of her language was laid bare for everyone to hear. Vance's face didn't move, but her eyes grew colder. A thug. Is that the terminology we use in training? I meant he looked suspicious, Patricia backpedaled. No, Vance cut her off. You judged him based on his appearance. You saw a black man in a hoodie and decided he didn't belong in your priority lane. You decided his federal ID, which you are trained to recognize, wasn't good enough because it didn't fit your narrative. Vance took a step closer to Patricia. You didn't protect the flight, Patricia. You endangered our reputation. You humiliated a hero. And you lied to me. Vance turned to Henderson. Robert, give me your boarding pass. What? Henderson asked. You were flying to D.C. for the regional meeting tomorrow, weren't you? In first class, seat 2B. Yes, but give it to me. Henderson, realizing he had no choice if he wanted to keep his job, printed his boarding pass and handed it to Vance. Vance took a pen from the counter, crossed out Henderson's name, and wrote Daniel Thorne in sharp, angular letters. She handed the boarding pass to Daniel. Mr. Thorne, Vance said softly, please take seat 2B. The flight attendants will be notified to treat you as our VIP. Champagne, meal service, whatever you need. Daniel stared at the ticket. But the name on the manifest. I'll handle the manifest, Vance said. Just get on that plane. Go see your sister. Daniel looked at Vance, then at the general. His eyes welled up. Thank you, he choked out. Don't thank me yet, Vance said. She turned back to Patricia. Patricia, since Mr. Henderson just gave up his seat and the flight is full, we have a problem. We are still one seat short for the standby passenger who took Mr. Thorne's original seat. That's unfortunate, Patricia muttered, looking for an exit. It is, Vance agreed. But I have a solution. Vance reached over the counter and ripped the rhinestoned lanyard off Patricia's neck. The sound of the clip snapping was loud. Patricia grasped her chest, shocked. What are you doing? I'm revoking your security clearance, Vance said calmly. You are no longer an employee of Sky High Airlines, which means you are no longer authorized to be in the secure area of the terminal. You can't fire me, Patricia shrieked. I have seniority. The union. You violated a federal anti-discrimination law, falsified company records by deleting a valid ticket, and harassed a customer, Vance listed off. I don't need a meeting to fire you, Patricia. I can do it for cause, right here, right now. Consider this your exit interview. Vance turned to the police officers. Officers, since Ms. Gable is no longer an airline employee and does not possess a valid boarding pass, she is technically trespassing in a secure federal zone. Would you mind escorting her out? And please take her badge. The karma hit the room like a thunderclap. The crowd erupted. Actual applause broke out. Patricia looked around wildly. Robert, do something. Henderson looked at the floor, finding a sudden interest in the linoleum pattern. I think you should go, Patricia. The police officers, the same ones Patricia had tried to weaponize against Daniel, stepped forward. Ma'am, the first officer said, barely hiding a smirk. Please come with us. You're causing a disturbance. No, Patricia screamed as they took her by the elbows. I've worked here for 12 years. You can't do this to me. He's the problem. Him. She pointed one last time at Daniel as she was dragged away, her heels skidding on the floor, her voice echoing down the terminal until it faded into the background noise of the airport. Daniel watched her go. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just let out a long, heavy sigh, the weight of the last hour finally lifting off his shoulders. General Sterling placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Go, he said gently. Board the plane, son. I'll make sure your bag gets on. Daniel nodded. He turned to Vance. You did the right thing. I did the only thing, Vance replied. Go. Daniel walked toward the jet bridge. As he handed his new boarding pass to the flight attendant at the door, she scanned it. It beeped green. Welcome aboard, Mr. Thorne, she said with a warm smile. Thank you for your service. He walked down the jet bridge, the darkness of the tunnel giving way to the bright lights of the aircraft. He was going home. But back at the terminal, the story wasn't quite over. Evelyn Vance was still standing at the podium, and she was looking at Mr. Henderson. "Now, Robert," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that made Henderson's blood run cold. "Let's talk about your leadership style. Because Patricia was a monster, yes. But you were the one who fed her." The cabin of Flight 492 was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaotic war zone of the terminal. The hum of the engines was a soothing white noise, vibrating gently through the floorboards. Daniel sat in seat 2B. He had never flown first class before. The seat was wide, the leather was soft, and the legroom was infinite, a small mercy for his titanium-reinforced shin, which had finally stopped throbbing. A flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah who had heard about the incident at the gate, had silently placed a glass of water and a warm towel on his tray table before takeoff. She didn't say a word, but the look in her eyes, a mix of awe and apology, said everything. Daniel stared out the window as Chicago fell away beneath them, the grid of the city turning into a patchwork quilt of grey and green. He wasn't looking at the view, though. He was replaying the look on Patricia's face, the sheer malice. "You okay, Hollowpoint?" The voice came from the aisle seat next to him, 2C. General Arthur Sterling had traded seats with a confused businessman to sit next to his former sergeant major. Daniel turned from the window. He looked at the general, a man who commanded entire divisions, a man who had the ear of the president, sitting there reading the Wall Street Journal with reading glasses perched on his nose. I'm tired, sir," Daniel admitted, his voice rasping. "I didn't want to make a scene. I just wanted to go home." Sterling folded the newspaper and placed it on his lap. He turned his body toward Daniel, his demeanor shifting from officer to father figure. "You didn't make the scene, Daniel. You survived it. Just like you survived the Korangal. It feels different out here," Daniel whispered, gesturing to the plane, the civilians, the world below. "Over there, you know who the enemy is. They're shooting at you. Here, the enemy is a lady with a smile and a name tag who thinks I don't belong because of my zip code or my skin." Sterling nodded slowly. "That's why I stepped in. Not just because I know you, but because if they can do that to a sergeant major, imagine what they do to a private first class who doesn't have a general standing behind him." Daniel rubbed his face with the warm towel. "How did you know? About Chloe?" Sterling sighed. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a file folder. He handed it to Daniel. "I didn't just happen to be in Chicago, son. I was at a conference, yes. But David called me 3 days ago. He told me the treatments at the local VA weren't working. He told me she was fading." Daniel opened the file. It wasn't military intel. It was medical paperwork. Transfer authorization. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Oncologist, Dr. Aris Thorne. No relation. "I made some calls," Sterling said softly. "The best specialist in the country is waiting for her. We aren't just going to visit her, Daniel. We're going to evaluate her for a new experimental protocol." I pulled some strings. Daniel stared at the paper. His hands began to shake again, but this time it was from gratitude. Tears spilled over, hot and fast. He tried to wipe them away, embarrassed. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Sterling said, patting Daniel's arm. "You took a bullet for me in 2012. The least I can do is get your sister a better doctor." The rest of the flight passed in a comfortable silence. For the first time in days, Daniel slept. He didn't dream of the war. He didn't dream of the airport. He dreamed of him and Chloe, playing tag in the backyard of their childhood home in Detroit before the world got heavy. When the pilot announced their descent into Reagan National Airport, Daniel woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The fight at the gate had drained him, but the general's revelation had refueled him. He wasn't just a victim of a bitter airline agent anymore. He was a soldier on a mission. The long road to room 404. The black SUV provided by General Sterling moved through the streets of Washington, D.C. like a phantom. Inside, the silence was thick, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of tires on pavement. Daniel sat in the back, his hands clasped tightly together, his knuckles turning white. The adrenaline from the confrontation at O'Hare had faded, leaving behind a cold, gnawing dread. He had fought a war to get on that plane, but now he faced a terrifying possibility that he was too late. General Sterling, sitting in the front passenger seat, glanced back at Daniel through the rearview mirror. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He knew that for men like them, hope was a dangerous thing until the mission was complete. They arrived at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, bruised, purple shadows across the building's facade. The air inside the hospital was different from the airport. It didn't smell of jet fuel and stress. It smelled of antiseptic, floor wax, and quiet desperation. They navigated the labyrinth of corridors. The sound of their boots on the linoleum seemed aggressively loud in the hushed hallway of the oncology ward. When they reached room 404, Daniel stopped. The door was heavy, a physical barrier between his fear and the truth. "Take your time, son," Sterling said, his voice low and grounding. "I'll hold the perimeter." Daniel nodded, took a breath that rattled in his chest, and pushed the door open. The room was dim, illuminated only by the rhythmic green glow of the vital sign monitors and the soft orange light of a bedside lamp. In the chair next to the bed sat David, Daniel's brother-in-law. David looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His shirt was wrinkled and his head was bowed in exhaustion. But Daniel's eyes went straight to the bed. Chloe looked small. Too small. The sister who had once outran him on the high school track team was now a fragile outline beneath the white thermal blankets. Her skin was translucent, her breathing shallow and labored. Daniel dropped his duffel bag. The sound woke David, who jumped up, disoriented. When he saw Daniel, the relief that washed over his face was heartbreaking. He didn't say a word. He just stepped aside. Daniel approached the bed as if walking through a minefield. He knelt on the hard tile floor, ignoring the sharp pain in his titanium-reinforced shin. He reached out and took Chloe's hand. It felt fever-hot and terribly thin. "Chloe," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm here. It's Mark." For a long moment, there was only the beep of the monitor. Then, slowly, her eyelids fluttered. She blinked, trying to focus through the haze of medication. When her gaze finally locked onto his face, a faint, tired smile touched her lips. "You made it," she breathed. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "I promised, didn't I?" Daniel choked out, pressing her hand to his forehead. "I told you I'd come home." "David said the flights were full," she whispered. "I found a way," Daniel said, tears finally spilling over, hot and fast. "I had to fight a dragon at the gate, but I found a way." "Did you win?" she asked, a spark of her old playful spirit flickering for a second. "Yeah, baby girl, I won." From the doorway, a shadow moved. It wasn't the general. It was a tall man in a white coat, carrying a thick tablet. He entered the room with an air of quiet authority. "Mr. Thorne?" the doctor asked. Daniel wiped his eyes and stood up. "Yes. I'm Dr. Aris Thorne," the doctor said, extending a hand. "No relation, I assume, but a good name nonetheless." Daniel looked confused. I thought Dr. Henderson was treating her. He was, the doctor said. Until about 3 hours ago. I received a direct transfer request from the Department of Defense. General Sterling has authorized your sister's inclusion in my clinical trial for aggressive immunotherapy. It's a protocol usually reserved for active duty personnel, but exceptions were made. Daniel spun around to look at the door. General Sterling was standing just outside the frame, his back to the room, guarding their privacy. She's strong, Daniel, the doctor continued. The previous treatment wasn't aggressive enough. We're going to change that starting tonight. I can't promise a miracle, but I can promise a fight. And looking at her charts, she's a fighter. For the first time in months, the crushing weight on Daniel's chest lifted. It wasn't a cure yet, but it was a chance, and a chance was all a soldier ever asked for. While Daniel held his sister's hand in the quiet of the hospital, the outside world was getting loud. The video recorded by the college student in line at O'Hare had been uploaded to TikTok at 3:15 p.m. By 8:00 p.m., it had crossed 2 million views. By midnight, it was the #1 trending topic on Twitter globally. The hashtag #Flight492 was trending alongside Hanahora Fire Patricia. The footage was damning. It captured everything. The sneer in Patricia's voice, the dismissal of the military ID, the arrival of the police, and the thunderous intervention of General Sterling. The internet did what it does best. It investigated. Frame-by-frame analysis highlighted the moment Patricia smirked when the police grabbed Daniel. Lip readers deciphered her whispering "thug" to the officer. Sky High Airline's public relations department was in meltdown mode. Their stock price dipped 4% in pre-market trading the next morning. The narrative wasn't just about bad customer service. It was about patriotism, race, and the abuse of power. The company needed a sacrificial lamb, and they needed it immediately. 2 days later, inside the glass-walled regional headquarters of Sky High Airlines, the air conditioning was freezing, but Patricia Gable was sweating. She sat at a long mahogany table. Opposite her sat Evelyn Vance, the regional director. To Vance's right was the vice president of HR. To her left, a silent lawyer. Robert Henderson sat a few chairs down, looking like he was trying to shrink into the upholstery. "I have 18 years of seniority," Patricia said, her voice trembling, but still laced with entitlement. "You can't fire me because of a viral video. I followed the manual. The ID looked suspicious. I have the right to—" "Stop," Evelyn Vance said. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. She slid a thick file across the polished table. "We ran an audit, Patricia," Vance said coldly. "We pulled your denial of boarding logs for the last 5 years. Do you know what we found?" Patricia stared at the file, saying nothing. 82%, Vance said. 82% of the passengers you selected for random security checks or denied for insufficient ID were people of color. That is statistically impossible to be random. That is a pattern. That is systemic targeting. "I was protecting the airline," Patricia shrilled. "You were protecting your own prejudices," Vance countered. "And you cost us a contract. The Department of Defense has put our carrier status under review because of you." Vance turned to the HR director. "Read it." The HR director adjusted his glasses. "Patricia Gable, your employment is terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct, violation of federal civil rights statutes, and falsification of company records, the deletion of the valid ticket. Due to the gross misconduct classification, you are ineligible for severance. Your pension contributions from the company are frozen pending legal review for damages." "My pension?" Patricia gasped. The color drained from her face. "You can't take my money." "You cost us millions in brand damage in 48 hours, the lawyer spoke up for the first time. Be grateful we aren't suing you personally for negligence." "Get out," Vance said. Patricia stood up, her legs shaking. She looked at Henderson. "Robert, help me." Vance turned her gaze to Henderson. "Save your breath, Patricia. Robert is joining you." "Me?" Henderson squeaked. "But I just arrived late." "You enabled her for years," Vance said, closing the file. "Cowardice in management is just as dangerous as malice in the staff. Hand over your badges. Security will escort you to the curb." The fall was absolute. Patricia Gable didn't just lose a job, she became a pariah. In the digital age, anonymity is a luxury she no longer possessed. 3 weeks later, desperate for income, she applied for a job at a car rental agency near the airport. The interview was going well until the manager, a young Hispanic woman, looked at her ID, then looked at her computer screen where a news tab was open. The manager turned the screen around. It was a still image from the video. Patricia's face twisted in anger, pointing a finger at Daniel. "Is this you?" the manager asked. Patricia froze. That was taken out of context." "The context was pretty clear," the manager said, standing up. "We serve everyone here. I don't think you'd be a good fit. Please leave." It happened again at a grocery store, where a cashier recognized her and refused to ring up her items. It happened at her church, where the congregation slowly stopped sitting in her pew. She became a prisoner in her own home, blinds drawn, living off savings that were rapidly dwindling, terrified of the world she had tried to police. Henderson didn't fare much better. Blacklisted from management roles, the former station manager found himself working the night shift at a logistics warehouse. His job was to load heavy cargo onto pallets, often the same military duffel bags he used to watch passengers carry. His back ached, his feet swelled, and every night he had to answer to a supervisor who was half his age and demanded absolute perfection. 3 months after the incident, the leaves in Washington, D.C. were turning gold and crimson. Daniel sat on a park bench near the Lincoln Memorial. The autumn air was crisp. He held a letter in his hand. It was on heavy, cream-colored stationery with the sky-high Airlines logo. It was a personal apology from the CEO, but inside the envelope was a check for $50,000. "A donation to the charity of your choice, in your name," the note read. Daniel looked up. Across the path, a woman in a wheelchair was laughing. It was Chloe. She was still thin, and her hair was covered by a colorful scarf, but the gray pallor of death was gone, replaced by the rosy flush of life. Dr. Thorne's treatment was working. The tumor markers were down 60%. She was going to live. Next to her, pushing the wheelchair, was General Arthur Sterling. He was wearing civilian clothes, a simple sweater and slacks, and he was smiling as Chloe recounted a story about Daniel's childhood. Daniel looked back at the check. He didn't need a new car. He didn't need a renovation. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "This is the outcome," he whispered to himself. He used the money to seed a new non-profit organization called The Checkpoint. Its mission, to provide legal defense and travel assistance for veterans who faced discrimination in public spaces. It would ensure that no soldier, sailor, or airman ever stood alone against a bully again. Daniel stood up and walked toward his sister and the general. The limp in his leg was still there, a permanent reminder of the war. But as he walked, his head was high. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a guardian. The nightmare at Gate B12 had ended. But the real story, the story of resilience, justice, and the unbreakable bond of those who serve, was just beginning. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Sergeant Major Daniel Thorne. He fought for his country in the mountains of Afghanistan, only to find himself fighting for his dignity at Gate B12 in Chicago. Patricia thought her badge gave her power. She thought she was the gatekeeper. She forgot the most important lesson of authority. True power isn't about who you can keep out. It's about who you let in. She tried to shame a man who had walked through fire, and in doing so, she set her own life in flames. The airport is a place of transit, but on that hot July day, it became a court of judgment. And as General Sterling proved, when you come for one of us, you better be ready for all of us. If this story moved you, if you believe that our veterans deserve nothing but the highest respect, please smash that like button right now. It helps the algorithm share these stories with the world. And I have a question for you. Have you ever witnessed the karma hit someone who was abusing their power? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I might feature your story in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story of justice served cold. Until next time, stay safe, stand your ground, and be kind. You never know who you're talking to.